So, welcome everyone to another episode of Relational Introvert. This is our final episode for this season, and I am excited actually to have Andrea Sanchez with me on this call as a guest, as a way to wrap up season one. I'll share a little bit more about what happens with season two as we begin to wrap our conversation, but let me first welcome Andrea to the call. Welcome.
Hi, great to see you. I'm so proud of you. Season one, amazing.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. I'm actually, uh, before I have Andrea share about herself, the reason why I think it's awesome that she's kind of my wrap up guest for the first season is because Andrea actually has, she's part of my story for Relational Introvert. I think I've shared it in previous episodes that this has been an exercise in running the experiment. And so when I was initially thinking about this experiment and how to roll it out, Andrea was actually one of the first people, interestingly enough, that I had spoken to about it. And what was really significant for me in our conversation, Andrea, I've shared it with you, is that you asked me a question that I actually wasn't really thinking about. That helped me to it actually helped to eliminate the roadblocks that I was seeing, which was really powerful. So that was speaking to the power of questioning and ability to engage other people in ideas. So I'm very grateful that happened. And I'm grateful that you are here today on this conversation with me and inviting all of us listening in on the conversation as well.
Well, I'm so glad you kicked it off. I love seeing people prosper. Great job.
That's awesome. Thank you. Sandra, before we get into our conversation, why don't you share with all of us a little bit about you and your story?
Sure. So let's see. If I were to sum it up, I'm passionate about learning always since I think the day I was born. I'm naturally curious all the time. I love asking questions, thus why I asked you your question. um, and not only to ask questions because I love to learn, but also to challenge people to think differently. I love to find a way when some conversation is going on to find an angle that perhaps people haven't talked about and go there. And I just love seeing, people's eyes light up, or maybe they're quiet and they don't know quite what to say, but later on they're like, you know what, Andrea, you really made me think differently. Thank you so much for saying that. But I love that. So it's like I love being the spark, but I also love to pay attention out there to see what can spark me. And sometimes things spark me in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes the last thing I can even imagine sparking my creativity, my imagination, is what makes a difference in my day. So with that said, I've been a writer all my life. I've always been so curious about why people act the way they do, why people think the way they do, why they respond the way they do, what is status quo versus acting differently. So I've always been in a path to find the courage myself and to challenge others to have the courage to truly be themselves, to think differently. If you have that thought, let it out, ask the question. So that took me to eventually my choice in career in communications, but also I discovered change management, organizational change, culture. So it's applying what I'm naturally passionate about into the official titles of what exists out there. So that's what a little bit about me.
That's awesome. I mean, one thing that's really standing out in what you shared is that curiosity piece. And the one other thing that you shared that is resonating with me is you talked about that, this has been an exercise for you to build your courage as you are helping others do the same. So I find that that's true a lot of times. A lot of the work that we do is actually serving ourselves in a way.
Yes.
And I don't mean that selfishly, just like it's serving us because it resonates with us so well. And so then in that way, we're serving others along the way as well. Right. So I find like that's kind of what you're sharing about your journey.
Absolutely. And it's a continuous journey. So in a way, when people say, oh, Andrea, you helped me so much, or thank you for listening, I'm saying, no, thank you, because you're helping me. You have no idea.
Right.
So I can totally relate with what you just said.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about Spark Story. So that is the work that you do.
Mhm.
And how does that connect with what you just shared about curiosity and building courage?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I have a strong background in marketing communications, but I felt like something was missing. Like I've worked in nonprofit for over 20 years, but I felt something was missing. So I ventured out on my own, and the missing piece was putting the human element first in communications and marketing, but really calling it out. And I found the best way to do that is to share from the heart, which is through stories. So in my work and what I propose to do with anyone I work with is I really try being curious about why they do what they do, where they want to be in 10 years, how do they want to be remembered, what is their legacy, and really pull the story from the heart, which represents the brand or the individual. Um, so that's what really Spark Story is personal branding through storytelling, but also a huge other facet to it, which is a big part of my core, is building communities, and building communities where people can feel empowered and
Mm.
courageous and know it's okay to be imperfect. And again, this is serving me as well because I need that constant reminder. So I've started a community. It's been almost over 5 years on Twitter called Dare to Be, and we have a great time once a week discussing everyday topics, but really showing that we're human and being vulnerable and being accepting toward each other.
Right. So in the current climate that we are right now, with all the um, heightened level of urgency, uncertainty, as people think about what all of this, the coronavirus crisis means to them and the impact that's happening to everybody, how is this Spark Story, the spirit of it, relevant today?
Gosh, I think, despite these surreal times, it's so important to just be self-aware of your mind, and the mindset is everything, and perspective is everything. Yes, it's a reality that we all need to deal with, and yes, some of those facts are pretty grim and not exactly positive, but we still have a choice. We have the reality, but we still have a choice on how to react or how to act or how to think. So what I want to do, and this is also a reminder for myself, is through my communities and through my social networks, and I want to extend that reminder. I like to, with the communities, check in daily, see how they're doing, but also when I pull like a Zoom call together or things like that, virtual events, I want it to be clear that this is a community where we're imperfect and that it's okay to show that you're fearful. Even you may have a certain title or whatever it may be, or you're the head of the household, or yes, you need to show other strength, but also it's okay to say that you're kind of scared too, and that you really don't know what to do, but we are going to get through this together. So I think that's an important part, is to really acknowledge and validate your feelings as a human being. You may not be strong every single moment of the day. You may see some news item and completely freaks you out all over again. So, and that's okay. So I like to form safe spaces through telling stories, through telling how we're feeling, to really give us that continuous strength that it's okay to feel how we are, and we together, and by sharing, you let someone else not feel so alone. So that's what I will continue through this journey with Spark Story.
That's actually really interesting. You talked about the idea of creating a safe space. I was actually thinking about that the other day. Is one of the things that's happening right now for a lot of people is this uncertainty in their level of security. So whether,
Right.
income being a big piece for a lot of people who are either business owners. So we can relate to that, business owners, where it's like, well, what does that mean in terms of contracts and things like that? People who hold steady jobs and their organizations are possibly looking to lay off. So there's a lot of that unsteadiness
Right.
and then that of course is impacting, partners and family members and so on as well. So I was thinking about that word security
Mm.
being something that is a uncertain piece for almost everybody right now. And so when you use the word safety, it makes me connect the two together, because even though we may not all be able to help each other with the job situation per se, right? It may not be that I have a job that I can give you, but the idea of creating safety is in support of security. Like that's the part that it
Right.
feeds into. So how do we create a safe space for you to even consider what's possible? How do we create a safe space? So you talk about it, one of the things for you, safe spaces around telling that story and sharing stories. So maybe that's the safe spaces. I create security by being able to have a very honest conversation about what are things, how they look right now, what's affecting me. And then there's others of us who might be able to provide a safe space for something different. And I think that's where we can actually connect to that security piece. So even though I don't get the answer that I came with in terms of I need a job, but that is not the only thing. That security is not just about the job. Like there's something else with the safety that we might be able to support. So I do appreciate what you shared around that as well.
Thanks. Yeah, no, you bring up a great point on the notion of safety. We automatically right now in our minds, of course, is job and health and obvious things like that. But there's also the safety of still, do I belong? Am I accepted? And how are people going to react if I react this way? Or do I really need to think this way, that everything's going to be okay, but I'm feeling another way? So there's the safety of being oneself during this time. As people, I've heard many people mention that during crisis, emotions are heightened, judgment is heightened. So some don't even understand who they are anymore because their emotions are out of control. So I think it's through more safe places to be able to share how you're feeling that people realize that, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels this way. But also showing that they still belong. They still are an important part of this world, because it's only together that we're going to get through this. So I think that's part of the safety as well.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about people sharing their stories, you said one of the things that you enjoy doing is being able to help the quiet ones who are not sharing their stories to kind of bring that to the surface. And that's actually pretty relevant, considering this podcast is about relational introverts. So usually introverts are the ones, right, that get seen as quiet and truly are more than likely quiet, but what does that actually mean in terms of helping people to share a story and being able to find a place, even during this time? It, again, to your point, it's probably heightened, the quietness at this time. And so I'm curious to find out from you, one, as an introvert yourself, what does storytelling, like how does storytelling or being able to encourage someone to bring their story out, how does that look differently with those who are quieter, like with the introverts? And is that even more heightened during this time, which is my guess, but I'm curious to see what you think.
From my direct experience, absolutely heightened. If you're an introvert, you kind of want to hide a little more. Because more people that aren't usually introvert are getting into your introverted space. So it's tricky, and I feel really bad for the extroverts because they don't know what to do. So I think it's safe to say we are all going through challenging times, and I find that you have to offer different ways to tell your story, or different ways to listen. different ways to engage. It's kind of like redefining engagement. Just because someone doesn't speak up doesn't mean they're not engaged. We all know that as introverts, right? We are constantly, as an introvert, we're constantly engaged in here. Our minds are so loud. So it's not fair to assume, just like it's not fair for us to assume things about extroverts. So I think with various types of channels and different types of ways to engage, such as if you don't want to be on video, if you don't want to discuss your story on video or using your voice, and there's other ways. There's blogging, there's journaling. If you don't want to share it with the world, at least just get it out on paper for you. I don't know how many times people say, when you write out what you're thinking, at least you've got it out. And that is so much, that's really healthy, because the more you keep inside, as you know, all that anxiousness just tends to go to other places in our body, and we may not, it may end up being a health issue later on. So the important thing is get your story out, whether for yourself, for others, maybe, and I find this through introverts as well, maybe right now it's the one-on-one. Find that one friend or find that one person, or maybe it's your pet. I don't know, but just you just need to let it out. The one thing that I must say is, you know, as an introvert, I like even signing up to these kind of podcasts, especially on video. Oh my gosh, video. I do not like video, but I challenge myself to be on video. It's like I have this alter ego that's purposely scheduling me on things. And then when the time comes, I'm like, why? But then I feel okay, because I know that if just one person can relate, then I've done my job, because I bet you one other person feels the exact same way. But if they hadn't heard your message, my message, then they must have, you know, could feel like they're the only ones like that. So I think that's why it's important for especially introverts as well to challenge themselves and come out. If you don't want to be on video and speak, don't do that, but challenge yourself. If you write something, it doesn't have to be very long, put it out on LinkedIn, make a tweet. That's really short. Or if you're, you know, advanced, go and blog something. You don't even have to understand the technicalities of it. There's a platform called medium.com, and you can create blog posts there, and it's you have a built-in audience. So I just let your story out. That's how people can connect.
Right. You know, I love what you said actually about the idea of letting your story out in the way that is most natural to you, right? Even as like a starting point. So I actually never really thought about personal journaling as a way of letting the story out. I always thought about the story needs to have a and exactly like an end recipient, an audience of taking it in, but that could very well be you, could
Right.
be the audience. And it's so true, right? Like when you were talking about the noise in our head, it's so true. If someone could actually put a microphone to the noise that's going on inside
a mess.
Exactly. It's a mess. Like there's a lot happening. So as much as it's all quiet out here, it's all being happening inside. But I, like you, the idea of putting pen to paper helps me in a massive way. And then sometimes I'm actually even relearning how important it is. And I've never looked at it as a story perspective. And so that's actually really cool. That's a good way for me to shift in how I think about it. But even, for example, when I have everyday learning, sometimes when that learning becomes part of muscle memory, we forget what got us here. And so the next time a relearning is needed, it's almost like, oh my goodness, I've never experienced this before. It's like starting from scratch. And so the idea of writing that story is helpful for us as individuals as well, because we can always go back to that chapter and say, you know, I have experienced this before. What were some of the key skills that I picked up? What did I strengthen along the way that I can apply again? So yes, it's not going to make it's not about making the relearning easy, but it is about the fact that I do have a story to go back on and rely on. Oh my goodness, I have this skill, this skill, this skill that I developed during that time. And I came up with these approaches. Why don't I give that a shot again? So
Right.
I really appreciate that idea of looking at storytelling, one, not just for the audience, but also for ourselves as the
Yeah.
audience. And that the idea of, to your point about video, it's not everybody's thing. I appreciate what you shared about the fact that what can you challenge yourself with too? It may not be your first thing to do, but maybe once you've done your blogging, once you've done your tweeting, once you've done a few things, it might, I like that there's an alter ego that says, okay, but let's push this just a little bit more. What might you be willing to do? And so yeah, like trying something different. And again, I talk about this podcast being just an exercise in trying something different. And that's exactly what it is. Like, you don't know what
Right.
comes out of that. So I really appreciate being able to look at story as something for me, not just for someone else. And that way that actually helps me to see that I am a storyteller, because I actually write quite a
We all
bit.
are. We all have a story in ourselves, whether we know it or not. And sometimes it takes a certain situation, event, a person that you meet to bring it out. And to take it a different, another layer to it is, why do we have to put stories into words? You may want to start drawing, and that may shape your story. You may put on a song or start singing, or a tune comes in your head, and that kind of starts triggering what your story may be. So it's fascinating.
Yes. Well, I loved what you said about this, because the shift for me also is, I have been guilty of sometimes saying about myself, well, I'm not really a good storyteller. But to be honest, now that I think about it, I've actually written a lot of stories that I may not have shared with everybody, but I've actually written quite a few. And I feel that I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of us who fall into the trap of, well, I don't, so and so is able to tell a story better. And yes, there's some people, when it comes to engaging a larger group, just have a certain skill set and being able to share
Right.
a story in certain ways. And I see that strength. But to your point, that doesn't mean that any of us is not a storyteller. Like, the size of your audience doesn't determine the effectiveness of your story.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. I appreciate being able to see that side of it. I mean, so when I think about how you approach helping people to share their story and kind of focused in that way, you talked a lot about curiosity as being a default for you since you were very young.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see how that helps you in being able to uncover story. But how do you then help others to build that as part of their operating mode as well, so that the storytelling is not just about a moment in time, but it's something that becomes an experience we create ongoing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What I have found is that some people may not think or believe they have a story, at least not a story worth telling, because they really don't know themselves, or they take themselves for granted. So again, curiosity. I ask tons of questions, and through those questions is when they start thinking and uncovering things that perhaps others, like myself, when I'm having conversations with them, think are a big deal, but they never thought it was a big deal. And so and that triggers something else and something else and something else. I love asking questions too about people's childhoods and what they were doing, or how would you describe yourself when you were in third grade? And often than not, then the words that they use are often words that still are applicable right now for them, even though they were a child back then.
Right.
Or even if they gave me a description of activities they used to do. Well, I used to be, I had a club when I was a kid, and we had club meetings, and we ate a bunch of candy, and we played kickball and all this stuff. But then I'm like, okay, so you're a leader, and what do you do now? And they describe it. And so it's fascinating how they don't realize they have these stories within themselves that tie who they are right now. Again, because the world is so chaotic, so full of noise, that they often don't have time to just think and really see what true value they're bringing into the world, and whether they helped someone, whether they knew they did or not, through their inspiration, whether they showed leadership, whether they had a title or not, because they went first on a certain thing, they said something first, or whatever. Whether they served humanity, which also shows leadership or empathy. I mean, people don't realize they're an inspiration to others, because they take themselves for granted.
Yeah, it's when you were talking about like how it connects back to who we were as children, that actually is really true, because a lot of it was a conversation I had with somebody earlier around excuse me, even with StrengthsFinder. A principle around StrengthsFinder is asking the question of, what did you enjoy as a child? And a lot of times, even if it's not the specific activity, the skills, the aspects that brought joy, there's actually similarity that's kind of carried through. So,
Right.
So your question around, tell me about, yourself, in the third grade is really valuable, because there are certainly we've had some very instrumental shifts in our lives very, very early on. It's now that I find we're more in autopilot. We probably weren't as much when we were that young. So it's actually really cool to be able to bring that out. And I love what you said about, we all have a story worth sharing and worth being heard. But we have automatically decided that, well, one, I'm not really good at telling the story, and two, who the heck is really interested in hearing my story? And we've just auto-censored, like we've just decided to self-censor ourselves.
Right.
Rather than putting that story out there. So I kind of, as you were sharing what you do, I was envisioning you as almost like a scribe, in a way that is not maybe writing it for them, but you're pulling it out in a way, in like this auditory scribe sort of mentality, where your curiosity is helping guide that out of people, which is actually really powerful. And I know right now we are in an interesting time, but I feel like that's relevant no matter what. Like, again, I feel right now is just heightening a lot of our uncertainties and insecurities, but that doesn't mean that this goes away. Like, this is a value at all times.
Right.
So as we kind of wrap up the conversation, I'm curious to find out from you, Andrea, like, when you think about our story, and the idea of sparking it, what would you leave with people? Like, what's something that everyone needs to be considering at this moment as we think about our stories?
Just continue to be you. Remind yourself who you are in your core. You've had values before this crisis. You still have values now, and you will still have values after. Don't let this crisis mold you into something that you're not. Don't let this crisis tell you that you can't do something, because there are different ways of doing things. I mean, look at technology and Zoom and all this stuff. Don't let this crisis tell you that your dreams have to be on hold, because they don't. It's just changing the way we do things again, or changing routines, and because your dreams are up here, and crisis doesn't take things away from up here. It may take away things from going outside and to the movie theater, or hanging out with your friends and things like that, but you can still do that in different ways. But it can't mess with your mind unless you let it mess with your mind. So you still have control of a lot of things. Control of your dreams, control of your mindset, control of your choices, control of really, I guess, use this time to figure out who you are. It's a wonderful time to get reacquainted with yourself. Again, start capturing. How do you do that? Start capturing your thoughts. on paper, words, a collage, whatever it may be. And you don't know, I mean, you don't know, whenever this thing is over, you may discover things about yourself that you didn't know, and that you perhaps will stop doing because they don't align with your values, and you thought all this time this was what you were supposed to do, or because people said you were supposed to do that because you're so good at it, but you're not passionate about it. So just be true to you.
That is amazing. What you shared about this is a time to really discover or rediscover a lot of things about yourself. And as uncertain as things might seem, it doesn't take away that this could be that opportunity to be able to shift. So it's almost, it's almost kind of calling people to what, not just about your own story, but what's the story you tell yourself. You're
Yeah.
almost saying like, let's flip the script on that too, because yes, it's not taking away from what's around you, but how do you stay true? So yeah, our values are not shifting because of this crisis. So I'm so excited that you were able to join me on today's call, Andrea. It's always really powerful insights that you bring to the table. If anyone, as we share this conversation through the different platforms, if anybody wants to just get in touch with you to expand on the conversation or to just take it to the next level, what would be the best ways that people could connect with you?
Sure. So I'm always on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I'm also always on Twitter, and my handle is asanchez16. I host Dare to Be chats every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you search the handle Dare to Be, you'll find me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on today's call, and to everyone who's listening as well. I want to put it out there. Our conversation kind of took the direction of sharing your story during this time and otherwise. And if there's anything that you have questions on, or you want to comment on once I get this up and posted, please feel free to join in on the conversation. Or if there's something that we didn't talk about that you feel that was something that was top of mind for you, then absolutely bring that up in the comments as well. And I'm excited to be able to share with all of you. Again, as I said earlier, this is episode 12 is the last one for season number 1. And I'm excited for and thankful to everybody who took the journey with me. And so we will be back in 3 weeks' time with season 2. And I'm looking forward to continuing this experimenting journey with everybody here.